Hello, I'm Ryan. Welcome back to the SleepStory Collective. I'm really glad you're here tonight, whoever you are, and wherever tonight has found you. Wherever in the world you are listening from right now, whether it's early or very late, whether the house around you is quiet or the rain is on the window, we are glad you made it here. This is a place built for exactly this moment. That's really all the SleepStory Collective has ever tried to be. A dependable place to come and unwind, to let the day fall quiet, and to ease gently towards sleep, one calm story at a time. The moment when the day is finally over and the body would like to stop, but the mind hasn't quite caught up yet. If that's where you are tonight, you are in the right place. If a story like this one ever finds its way to somebody who needed it tonight, it's usually because somebody else took half a second to leave it a like or a kind word on their way to sleep. And I'm always quietly grateful for that. But that isn't why we're here right now. Right now, we're here because you have a mind that has been turning pages all day, and it hasn't found a good place to stop. Maybe it's been turning through conversations. Maybe it's been turning through everything you still have to do tomorrow. Maybe it's just been turning the way minds do, without any clear reason at all, flicking from one half-formed thought to the next, without ever quite closing on any of them. That's all right. That's what tonight is for. Whether tonight has been a loud day or a quiet one, whether it was full of people or spent mostly on your own, whatever shape it took, it doesn't need to keep shaping the next few hours. The pages from today can stop turning now. They're allowed to. There is nothing else you need to finish before this story begins. There is no message from today that needs a better reply than the one you already gave it. There is no conversation from this afternoon that needs replaying one more time to get it right. There is no plan for tomorrow that needs to be built completely before you're allowed to rest tonight. You do not need to solve anything in the dark. You do not need to organize tomorrow before you're allowed to close your eyes. You do not need to keep holding today the way you've been holding it since it began. Carefully, carefully, in both hands. You do not need to perform rest perfectly, or force stillness, or listen to any of this in exactly the right way to get any good from it. You do not need to have today finished. Half finished is allowed. Unfinished is allowed. You are allowed to put it down. Not fix it, not finish it. Just put it down, the way you might set down something heavy you've been carrying all day without noticing how heavy it had become. You do not need to listen to every word of what follows. You do not need to stay awake for the whole of it. You are not doing this wrong if your attention drifts, or comes and goes, or disappears altogether somewhere in the middle. That's not a failure of this story. That's the story working exactly the way it's supposed to. For now, let's start with the body, because the body is usually a little easier to settle than the mind. And once the body has quieted down, the mind tends to follow along behind it in its own time without being told to. So if you can, let your weight settle a little more heavily into whatever is holding you right now, the mattress, or the pillow, or the chair, or the sofa. Let it take a little more of you than it was taking a moment ago. You don't have to do anything for it. It's already built to hold you. Let's start at the face, because the face carries more of the day than people usually notice. Let the brow soften, the way it would if you just remembered there was nothing left to frown about. Let the small muscles around the eyes loosen, the ones that have been quietly working since this morning, focusing and adjusting and taking things in, hour after hour, without a single break. Let the eyes themselves feel heavier in a comfortable way, resting more fully than they have all day. Let the jaw unclench just a little, releasing whatever it's been holding onto, whether that's words unsaid or simply the shape of concentration. If it wants to flag open slightly, let it. Let the tongue stop pressing up against the roof of the mouth, the way it does without you noticing, and let it rest low and soft instead. Let the throat soften too, easing out of whatever privacy it's been holding before the last communication of the day. Now let that same softening spread down into the shoulders. Let them drop a fraction lower than they were a moment ago. Let them stop holding the shape the day pressed them into, whether that shape came from a desk or a steering wheel, or simply from carrying yourself through hours that asked a lot of you. Let the arms grow heavier along whatever is supporting them. Let the hands uncurl. Let the fingers loosen from whatever they've been quietly gripping today, even if it was only the edge of a phone or a pen or a thought they didn't know how to put down. There is nothing in your hands that needs holding right now. Let that same heaviness move into the chest. Let it stop bracing the way it braces without asking permission all day against things that may or may not come. Let the breath move a little lower into the stomach without needing to be deepened on purpose. Let the back widen against whatever is behind it, spreading a little wider than it has been holding itself, the way paper spreads flat once it stops being folded. Let's breathe together for a moment, in whatever way feels easy, without forcing it into any particular shape. One breath, just to arrive here fully, in this exact moment, nowhere else. One breath, a little softer than the first, to let something in the chest loosen that's been tight since sometime earlier today, whenever that was. That's it. There's no correct way to breathe here. There's only this, whatever this turns out to be for you tonight. Now, about that racing mind, the one that keeps turning pages long after it should have stopped for the night, I want to offer you a different way of thinking about it, just for tonight. One that doesn't ask you to fight it, or empty it, or shut it down, because none of those things tend to work very well at this hour anyway. Instead, picture your thoughts, just for a moment, as pages. Some of them are covered in writing from today. Some of them are half finished, waiting for an ending you haven't found yet. Some of them don't say anything important at all. They've just been turning over and over because nothing told them they were allowed to stop. You don't need to read every page again tonight. You don't need to finish the ones that are unfinished. You can simply let them stop turning. Let them come to rest, face down, quiet, however they happen to land. Nobody is grading them. Nobody is checking that they're in order. They can just settle, the way a stack of paper settles once a hand stops shuffling through it. Tomorrow is still tomorrow. It will still be there in the morning, exactly as it needs to be, whether you finish thinking about it tonight or not. Nothing about tomorrow depends on you solving it at this hour, in the dark, with your eyes closed. Let it wait. It's very good at waiting. It's been waiting all along. Nothing sharp is coming. Nothing here will ask anything hard of you. This is a safe, unhurried place, built for exactly this kind of softening, and you're allowed to take as long as you need to arrive in it. This story is for the person who has been carrying rather a lot, quietly, for rather a long time, without ever making a fuss about it, whose mind keeps a kind of ledger of its own, tallying everything that still needs doing. If that sounds familiar, you are exactly who this room was built for, and nobody here needs anything more from you than for you to simply lie still and let the pages come to rest. This can become part of your night if you'd like it to. Not just tonight, but any night the pages won't stop turning. Some part of tonight's story may still be here waiting for you, even if you fall asleep before it ends, because nothing in it needs finishing to have done its job. You can always come back to it. Now, let's go somewhere together, gently, the way you might walk into a warm room from a cold street without quite noticing the moment you crossed the threshold. Somewhere there is a small workshop, tucked behind a shopfront on a quiet street, where the last light of the evening is still burning long after everywhere else has gone dark. Paper is being made there, slowly, carefully, the way it has been made for longer than anyone in the town can quite remember. And tonight, we're going to spend some time inside it, watching someone else do the settling so that you don't have to do any of it yourself. Tonight's story is called The Papermaker's Night Press. The street outside is narrow and cobbled, the kind that holds the day's warmth a little longer than the wider roads. And by this hour, it is empty, apart from the sound of a single window still glowing gold near the far end. Behind that window is a workshop that has stood on this corner for longer than the shops on either side of it. Low-ceilinged, deep, smelling faintly of cotton and warm ink, and the particular mineral smell of water that has been used to make something new. Inside, the day's work is nearly done. A woman named Marion is moving slowly between the workbench and the great iron press at the center of the room, and she has the unhurried competence of someone who has done this exact set of movements thousands of times before and has never once needed to rush through any of them. She is not thinking about finishing quickly. She is thinking, if she is thinking about anything at all beyond her hands, about getting each single sheet right, one at a time, the way she always has. By day, this same room looks quite different. The front half given over to a small counter where customers come and go, asking for a particular weight for a wedding invitation, or a particular texture for a set of cards. And Marion greets each of them the same steady, unhurried way she does everything else. The little brass bell above the door rings each time someone enters, and it rang a great many times today, more than most days in fact, though you would never guess that now, with the counter dark and the shutters drawn and the whole front of the shop folded quietly into shadow. By this hour, the shop has become something else entirely. No longer a place of counters and customers, but simply a workshop, private and warm, kept company only by the low lamp, the humming press, and whoever happens to be finishing the last of the day's work. The press itself sits like the heart of the room, a great dark iron frame with a wide flat bed and a heavy screw wheel on top, worn smooth and shining at the handle from generations of palms. It hums faintly even at rest, the low, warm sound of old metal settling after use. And that hum sits underneath everything else in the room, the way a held note sits underneath a piece of music without ever needing to be noticed on its own. Around the press, on every side, are the marks of a full day's work brought carefully to its close. Wooden trays of pulp, drained and pressed, waiting their turn. Stacks of blotting paper, soft and grayish, layered between each new sheet to draw out the last of the water. A row of felts hanging along one wall, damp still, smelling faintly of wool and rain. Above the workbench, strung from one side of the room to the other, hang lines of drying paper, each sheet clipped lightly at both corners, swaying just slightly whenever the stove breathes out a little more warmth than usual. The sheets themselves are pale and slightly uneven, handmade paper never quite matching its neighbor, each one carrying a faint watermark near its center that only shows itself properly when held up to the light. Marion knows the watermark by feel now, without needing to check it, the way you know the shape of your own signature without looking at your hand while you write it. It's a small mark, nothing dramatic, just a simple pressed symbol worked into the mold years ago by someone before her. And it has outlasted every person who has worked this press since. Every sheet in this room began its life much earlier in the day, long before this quiet hour, as nothing more than soft gray pulp lifted carefully onto a wooden mold, a wire screen stretched tight inside a frame, and shaken gently from side to side until the fibers settled themselves evenly across the surface. Marion did that part herself this morning, standing at the trough for hours, lifting and shaking and lifting again. The same motion repeated so many times that her arms had long since stopped noticing the weight of it. Each newly formed sheet was then turned out onto a waiting felt in a practice called couching, pressed briefly and stacked between more felts to wait for the big press. Layer upon layer, dozens of thin, damp sheets and their soft woolen cushions building slowly into the very stack that Kennedy beneath the iron wheel. It is a slow process from kidnapping to end, rag to pulp, pulp to sheet, sheet to press, press to dry, and not one single part of it can be the Hong setting for it later. Marion has North bending that. If anything, she has always found a kind of relief in a process that simply refuses to be hurried. One that asks, quite firmly, to be done exactly as slowly as it needs to be done, and not one moment faster. At the far end of the room, close to the old iron stove, there's a low basket lined with a folded blanket, and curled inside it, entirely unbothered by the hour, is a gray cat with her paws tucked beneath her chest. She is not the workshop's cat exactly. Nobody quite remembers deciding to keep her. She simply arrived one winter and has stayed every winter since, moving between the stove and the workbench and the windowsill, according to some private schedule of her own. Tonight, she is by the stove, which means the room is warm enough, which is one of the small, quiet signals Marion has learned to trust over the years without ever needing to check the temperature herself. Marion crosses to the drying lines first, the way she always does at this hour, checking each sheet with the back of 2 fingers, feeling for the particular dryness that tells her a page is finally ready to come down. Some sheets are ready, others need a little longer. She moves along the line slowly, unclipping the finished ones and laying them flat on the bench in a growing stack, and leaving the rest exactly where they are, swaying gently in the warm air from the stove. There is no urgency in any of this. Paper dries when it dries, and pushing it faster has never once worked, so she has long since stopped trying. Once the ready sheets are down, she carries them to the press. One at a time, she lays each finished sheet between 2 clean boards, smoothing it flat with the side of her hand before setting the next one on top, building a careful stack, layer by layer, the way you might build anything that needs to end up perfectly level. When the stack is built, she turns the great iron wheel at the top of the press, slowly, both hands wrapped around the worn wooden handle, and the whole frame gives a low, creaking groan as the weight comes down evenly across the stack. The sound is deep and steady, more felt than heard, a long, slow pressure settling through iron and wood and paper all at once. This is the part of the work Marion has always found the most satisfying. More than the pulping, more than the molding, more than any of the earlier steps that make up a single sheet of paper. This is the part where everything that was slightly uneven, slightly rippled, slightly restless, is simply pressed flat and told gently but completely to stay that way. The paper doesn't fight it. It never has. It simply accepts the weight and settles, and comes out flatter and calmer than it went in. There was one sheet earlier this evening that gave her a little more trouble than the rest, curling stubbornly at one corner, no matter how carefully she laid it flat, the fibers having dried just slightly uneven on that one edge, for no reason she could easily explain. She didn't force it. She simply set it aside, misted it very lightly with a little water from a small brass sprayer kept for exactly this purpose, and let it sit a while under a single board before returning to it later with the rest of the stack. By the time the press came down over it the second time, the curl had eased on its own, quietly, without any real struggle, and the sheet had settled into the same flat, calm shape as accounting around it. Marion didn't think of this as fixing anything. She thought of it, if she thought of it at all, as simply giving the paper a little more time to do what it was always going to do anyway. Some sheets settle on the first press. Some need a little water and a little patience and a second pass beneath the weight before they're ready. Neither kind of sheet is wrong for needing what it needs. She leaves that stack under the press and turns to the next task, because there is always a next task, though never one that sells wrapped. At the side of the room stands a low cupboard with dozens of narrow drawers, each one labeled in faded ink with a weight and a texture: cream and heavy, pale and thin, cream and thin, ivory and heavy. And into each drawer goes a different batch of finished paper, sorted by feel as much as by sight. Marion runs her thumb along the edge of a stack before deciding where it belongs, feeling for the particular grain that tells Core which drawer it's meant for, and slides it home with a soft wooden sound that clocks gently around the quiet room. If this kind of quiet workshop story ever finds its way to somebody who really needed it tonight, it's often because somebody earlier left a small kind word behind on their way through. And that always means more than it probably should. But we don't need to think about that right now. Right now, there's simply a room, and a woman moving calmly through it, and a task with no end that particularly matters, only a rhythm that continues. Once the sorting drawers are filled for the night, Marion turns her attention to the inkstone near the window, a heavy, flat slab of dark stone with a shallow, worn hollow at its center, used only for stamping the workshop's own small mark onto finished reams before they're wrapped for morning. She lifts the stopper from a squat glass jar and lets a little ink pool into the hollow, then works it gently with a small wooden roller until it spreads even and smooth across the surface, the way you might smooth a blanket before folding it. The smell of the ink is warm and faintly bitter, oak and iron, and it has been the same smell in this exact spot for as long as Marion has worked here. She takes a small brass stamp from its hook beside the stone, presses it lightly into the inked hollow, and then onto the corner of the topmost sheet in a finished stack. A plain little mark, nothing more than the letter of the street this workshop sits on. The mark comes up clean and even. She checks it once, nods slightly to herself, and sets the stamp back on its hook. Outside, the town has gone fully quiet now. The kind of quiet that only settles after even the latest of the late walkers have finally gone home. Somewhere further down the street, a clock strikes the hour, low and unhurried, the sound rolling gently through the cool night air and fading before it fully reaches the workshop window. Marion doesn't look up from what she's doing. She has heard that clock strike this same hour more nights than she could count, and it has become less like a sound now and more like a kind of company, a reminder that the world outside is settling too, in its own slow way, at exactly the same pace as the room she's standing in. She moves to the stove next, opening the small iron door just enough to add a single fresh piece of wood, watching it catch slowly at the edges before closing the door again with a soft metallic click. The gray cat shifts slightly in her basket at the sound, one ear flicking, then settles again just as quickly, entirely undisturbed. The warmth from the stove reaches out across the room in slow waves, the kind of warmth that doesn't announce itself. It simply arrives, filling the corners a little more fully than they were filled a moment before. Marion returns to the bench and begins trimming the edges of a finished stack, using a long, flat blade she has owned for years, worn thin and bright along its edge from careful sharpening. She works slowly and evenly, running the blade along a metal rule laid flat against the paper, and each pass produces the same soft, satisfying sound. A single, clean line drawn through a stack of pages all at once, edges falling away in neat, curling ribbons onto the bench below. The trimmed stack that remains is perfectly square now, corners crisp, every sheet exactly the same size as the one beneath it. There is something deeply calming about watching something slightly uneven become perfectly uniform through nothing more than patience and a steady hand. If you're beginning to feel the day growing a little more distant now, further away than it was when this story started, I'm glad. If you'd like a place to come back to whenever a night like this one finds you again, subscribing to the SleepStory Collective means this room and this workshop and this particular kind of quiet will always be here waiting for you on this night and any other. There's no need to remember to do that right now, or to do anything at all right now, except keep listening, or keep drifting, whichever your mind happens to prefer. But for now, let's stay a little longer and keep watching Marion work. With the trimmed stacks set aside, Marion turns to tomorrow's preparation. Because a workshop like this one is never only about tonight. It's always quietly reaching one small step into the morning as well. At the back of the room stands a low stone trough, wide and shallow, where the raw pulp waits between one day's work and the next. She lifts the wooden lid and checks the water level with the flat of her hand, feeling for the right coolness, the right weight, before adding a little fresh water from the jug kept beside it for exactly this purpose. The pulp shifts beneath the surface, pale and soft. Cotton and linen rag broken down slowly over days into something that hasn't decided yet what shape it will become tomorrow. She stirs it once, slowly, with a long wooden paddle worn smooth along its edge, and sets the paddle back against the wall when she's done. Above the trough hangs a rack of molds and decals, the wooden frames that give every sheet its shape and its edges, each one hung on its own peg, dry and ready for morning. Marion runs her hand along the row without lifting any of them down, simply checking that each one is exactly where it belongs. The way you might run a hand along a row of coats on hooks without needing to try any of them on. One frame is a fraction crooked on its peg. She straightens it without pausing, an adjustment so small and so practiced that her hand seems to know to make it before the rest of her has properly noticed. Nearby, a line of felts hangs over a low wooden rail, damp still from the day's pressing, giving off that same faint smell of wool and rain that fills the corners of the room. She turns each one over as she passes, letting the drier side face outward, so that by morning they will be ready again, soft and even, for whatever the next day asks of them. This is not a task with any real urgency to it. It is simply a small kindness done for tomorrow, by someone who has learned that a little care done tonight always makes tomorrow a gentler place to arrive in. One of tonight's bundles, the cream-heavy stock stacked nearest the door, is bound for the bookbinder 2 streets over, who orders exactly the same weight and the same size every single month without ever once changing his order, and has done so for as many years as Marion has been keeping the ledger. She knows without checking that he'll want it wrapped the same way he always wants it. Corners squared, twine doubled rather than single, and she wraps it that way now out of habit rather than instruction, because some habits, once they're this old, stop needing to be remembered and simply happen on their own. There's a comfort in a customer like that, one whose needs never change, one who arrives at the same reliable rhythm every month, like the striking of the town clock, needing nothing surprising, only the same dependable thing, done the same dependable way, again and again. Most of what leaves this workshop travels like that, in fact, to people who have long since stopped needing to explain what they want, because the workshop already knows and simply provides it, quietly, on time, exactly as expected. Marion returns to the bench and begins the slow work of wrapping the finished bundles for the morning post. Around each stack of paper, she folds a sheet of heavy brown wrapping paper, corner over corner, the way you might wrap something precious, and secures it with a length of pale twine, tied off in the same quick, practiced knot each time. The first bundle she ties slowly, checking the knot twice, the way you check anything new. By the third or fourth bundle, her hands have found their rhythm again, and the knot appears almost on its own, sure and even, without her needing to watch her own fingers do it. By the last bundle in the row, she barely looks down at all, her hands simply finishing the work while her eyes rest on the low lamp at the edge of the bench, and the twine draws tight with the same soft sound it made the very first time. Patient, familiar, exactly the same, no matter how many times the evening has asked for it. Onto each wrapped bundle she presses a small disc of red wax, warmed briefly over a low candle kept just for this, and seals it with a narrow brass stamp shaped like a single feather, the workshop's own quiet mark, pressed the same way it has been pressed for years. The wax cools almost instantly, hardening into a small dark red circle at the center of each parcel, and she sets each finished bundle onto the shelf by the door, ready for whoever collects the morning post. Outside, the soft rain that began earlier has settled into something steadier now. A gentle, even patter against the window glass, neither heavier nor lighter than it was a few minutes before, simply continuing at its own unhurried pace. Somewhere further off, beyond the edge of the town, a late train passes low and distant, a long, soft rumble that rises and fades again within a few seconds, barely disturbing the quiet at all. Marion doesn't look up. She has heard that same train pass at roughly this hour more nights than she could count, and like the clock earlier, it has stopped being a sound that means anything in particular. It's simply part of the night now. One more small, dependable thing happening exactly when it always happens, whether anyone is listening for it or not. She writes a short label for each finished bundle next. A few careful words in the same small handwriting, naming the weight and the texture and the number of sheets inside. The pen scratches softly against each label, unhurried, and she presses each one down flat against its bundle with the side of her hand before moving to the next. There is something almost ceremonial in this last small task, though nobody watching would call it that, because to Marion it is simply the final, quiet confirmation that everything is exactly as it should be, named, sorted, sealed, and ready. The gray cat, who had drifted back to the basket by the stove some time ago, rises again now and stretches, arching her back in one long, unhurried curve before padding across the floor toward the shelf of finished bundles. She sniffs once at the nearest parcel, entirely unimpressed by it, and then settles instead onto the cool flagstones beside the shelf, curling into a loose circle, tail tucked neatly around her paws. Marion glances down and smiles slightly, the way you might smile at something familiar rather than something surprising, because the cat does this most nights at almost exactly this point in the work, as though she too has learned the shape of the evening by heart. With the bundles wrapped, sealed, labeled, and shelved, Marion allows herself a slower pace for the first time all evening. She fills a small tin kettle from the jug by the trough and sets it on the flat top of the stove, not for any real need, simply for the quiet comfort of hearing it begin its low, steady murmur as it slowly warms. While she waits, she wipes down the tools laid out along the bench. The paddle, the small brass stamp, the metal rule used for trimming, each one lifted, wiped, and returned to its place with the same unhurried care she gives to everything else in this room. If you're still with this story, even loosely, even with your eyes already closed and your attention drifting somewhere just beyond the edges of it, that's exactly right. You don't need to follow every wrapped bundle or every small task to still be resting inside this room. You can let the details blur a little now, the way a room blurs at the edges just before sleep. Everything a little softer, a little further away, a little less sharp than it was a few minutes ago. With the kettle beginning to murmur softly on the stove behind her, Marion opens the heavy ledger that lives on the corner of the desk, its cover soft and worn from years of handling, and records the night's work in small, careful handwriting. A column for weight, a column for texture, a column for how many finished bundles are ready for the morning post. The pen moves slowly, unhurried, each entry exactly as neat as the one before it. And when she's finished, she closes the ledger gently and sets it back in its corner, precisely where it always sits. Somewhere behind her, the gray cat stretches, rises from the basket, and pads silently across the floor to the base of Marion's stool, where she settles again with a soft thump and a long, contented sigh. Marion glances down, reaches without looking, and rests one hand briefly on the cat's back, feeling the low, steady rhythm of her breathing beneath her palm. Neither of them says anything, because there's nothing that needs saying. The room holds them both easily, the way it has held every quiet worker who has ever closed it down for the night. The kettle on the stove begins to sing softly, just below a whistle, and Marion rises to lift it off before it can grow any louder, setting it on a folded cloth beside the inkstone to cool for a moment. She pours a little of the hot water into a plain cup, adds a few dried leaves from a small tin kept on the shelf above the bench, and leaves it to steep while she finishes tidying the last few things within reach. There's no rush to drink it. It will still be warm in 10 minutes, and warmer still than the room if she leaves it a little longer than that. So she simply lets it sit, the way she lets most things in this workshop sit until they're properly ready. When she finally does lift the cup, she wraps both hands around it rather than using the handle, feeling the warmth spread slowly into her palms, into her fingers, into the small, tired places at the base of each thumb that have done so much careful work tonight without complaint. She drinks slowly, leaning back slightly against the edge of the bench, and lets her eyes travel once, unhurried, around the room she has just finished closing down. The drying lines, mostly empty now, swaying only faintly. The drawers, closed, labeled, complete. The press, dark and quiet, holding its last stack beneath its patient weight. The shelf by the door, lined with wrapped and sealed bundles, waiting for whoever comes for them in the morning. She thinks, without any particular urgency, about the watermark pressed into every sheet that leaves this room. The small, quiet mark hidden inside the paper that only shows itself when it's held up to a light. It occurs to her, not for the first time, that most things carry a mark like that somewhere inside them. something quiet and unremarkable most of the time, only visible when you happen to hold them the right way, in the right light, for long enough to notice. She doesn't dwell on the thought. It passes through her the way most thoughts do at this hour, gently, without needing to be followed anywhere in particular. And she lets it go the same way she lets a finished sheet go once it's dry, no longer needing her attention, simply complete. If your own mind offers you a thought like that tonight, quiet and unhurried, with nowhere in particular to go, you don't need to chase it either. You can let it drift past the way Marion lets hers drift past, noticed, appreciated even, and then released, without needing to turn it over twice. Outside, the rain continues its steady, even patter against the glass, and somewhere beneath it, fainter still, the last of the evening traffic on the main road has finally gone quiet altogether. The cat, still curled at the base of the stool, shifts once, tucks her nose a little further beneath her tail, and settles again into the same slow rhythm of breathing that has filled the corner of the room for the better part of an hour now. Marion finishes the last of her tea, sets the empty cup down in the corner of the bench, and allows herself, for just a moment, to simply sit, hands loose in her lap, shoulders finally, completely at rest, doing absolutely nothing at all. It's worth pausing here to notice something about this room, if only for a moment. Nothing that happens inside it happens quickly. Nothing that happens inside it happens with any sense of urgency at all. Every single task, from pressing to sorting to stamping to trimming to tying, has exactly the time it needs, no more and no less. And Marion has never once tried to rush any part of it, because rushing paper has never once made it dry any faster or press any flatter. The work simply unfolds, one careful step following the one before it, the way a page follows the page before it, in a book nobody is racing to finish. If you find your own thoughts drifting in and out right now, that's exactly as it should be. You don't need to follow every part of this story closely to still be resting inside it. You can let your attention come and go the way the light comes and goes across the workshop floor, brightening near the lamp, dimming further out, never fixed in one place for very long. Marion moves to the window next, the last task before the room can be properly closed for the night, and draws the curtain across slowly, shutting out the last of the cobbled street outside. Before she does, she looks out for a moment, the the way she always does, watching the empty road and the dark shop fronts opposite, all of them closed and still, all of them waiting for the same morning she is preparing for. The rain that has been falling steadily since earlier in the evening continues now against the window glass, the kind that settles over a sleeping town without waking anyone at all. She stands there a moment longer, simply listening to it, small and even and patient, before drawing the curtain fully closed. With the curtain drawn, the room feels smaller and warmer than it did before, the way rooms always do once the outside world has been shut politely away for the night. The lamp on the desk casts its low gold light across the bench, across the stacked bundles, across the sleeping cat, across the great dark shape of the press, standing quiet now at the center of environmental. The stove murmurs softly behind its iron door. Somewhere above, the last few sheets on the drying line sway very slightly, though there is no wind inside to move them, only the faint warm air rising gently from below. The room smells the way it always smells at this hour. Warm cotton and old iron, and the faint, bitter trace of ink, mixed with something softer underneath. Beeswax, perhaps, or simply the particular smell of a room that has been quietly worked in for a very long time. It's not a smell anyone would think to notice on their first visit here, but Marion has long since stopped being able to walk through that door without noticing it immediately, the way you notice the smell of your own home the moment you step back inside it after a long day away. Marion checks the press one final time, running her hand lightly along its cool iron frame, feeling for anything out of place, though there never is anything out of place. Not really. Not after all these years. She wipes it down once with a soft cloth kept for that exact purpose, restoring the shine to the worn handle at the top, and hangs the cloth back on its hook beside the stone. The press will sit quiet now until morning, holding its last pressed stack gently beneath its weight, patient the way iron is patient, without needing anything from anyone until it's called on again. She crouches briefly beside the basket to top up the small saucer of water kept there for the cat, who opens one eye just long enough to register the small kindness before letting it close again, entirely unbothered. Marion rests a hand lightly on the soft gray fur for a moment, feeling the steady, unhurried rise and fall beneath her palm, and something in her own shoulders seems to settle a little further, simply from the contact, the way it always does. She checks the inkstone, dry and clean. She checks the drawers, each one closed, each one labeled, each one exactly where it should be. She checks the bundles on the bench, tied, stamped, recorded, ready. She checks the felts, turned and airing. She checks the molds, hung straight on their pegs. She checks the pulp trough, Lid closed, water settled. Each check takes only a moment, and each one ends the same way, with a small, quiet nod, as though she is simply confirming to herself what she already knew, that the room is finished and settled and ready to rest. One by one, she moves around the room, dimming what still needs dimming, turning down the small lamp above the inkstone, letting the light above the drawing lines fade to almost nothing, until only the desk lamp remains, low and gold and steady, the one light this room never fully loses. She checks the stove door once more, latched properly, the fire banked low enough to hold gently through the night without needing anything further from her, and rests her palm briefly against the warm iron before stepping away. At the door, she checks the lock without really needing to, the way you check something you already know is secure, simply because checking it is part of how the evening ends, and has been for longer than she can remember. If it feels like the story is beginning to settle around you now, and the room around you feels a little quieter than it did when we started tonight, you're exactly where you're meant to be. Subscribing to the SleepStory Collective means a new story like this one will always be waiting here for you. On any night the pages start turning again and won't stop on their own. Now, let's stay a while longer in this quiet workshop and let the night finish closing in around it. Marion lowers the wick on the desk lamp, just slightly, enough to soften the gold light without losing it entirely, and settles onto the tall stool beside the workbench with a small, worn cushion tied to its seat. She doesn't reach for anything else to do. For the first time all evening, there is genuinely nothing left that needs her hands. The bundles are tied. The press is quiet. The ledger is closed. The paper that needed drying has dried, and the paper that needed pressing has been pressed. And every single sheet that passed through this room tonight has come out flatter, calmer, and more settled than it went in. She sits for a while, simply listening. The soft rain against the window, steady now, unhurried. The low creak of the stove settling as its fire burns gently down. The faint, even breathing of the cat curled once more against the leg of her stool. The occasional small sway of a drying sheet overhead, catching some last trace of warm air before finally coming to rest. Nothing in this room is racing toward anything. Nothing in this room has anywhere else to be. Every single object here, the press, the inkstone, the drawers, the bundles, the sleeping cat, the woman on the stool, is simply here, held gently by the same quiet room, at the same quiet hour, needing nothing further from the night. The molds rest on their pegs. The felts rest on their rail. The pulp rests beneath its lid, patient until morning. Even the brass stamp hung back on its small hook beside the stone has nothing left to press tonight, and simply hangs there, still and quiet, exactly the way everything else in this room has learned to be, once the day's work is finally, properly done. If your own thoughts are still turning somewhere in the back of your mind, let them turn a little slower now, the way the last sheet on the drying line turns slower and slower until it finally stops moving altogether. You don't need to catch every page as it turns. You don't need to read what's written on it. You can simply let it settle, face down, quiet, wherever it happens to land, the way every finished sheet in this workshop has settled tonight, without complaint, without needing to be perfect, only needing to be done for now. Somewhere above the bench, the last sheet on the drying line, the one that curled stubbornly earlier in the evening and needed a little extra water and a little extra patience, hangs completely still now, page down, exactly as flat and exactly as settled as every other sheet around it. It took a little longer than the rest to get there. That's all right. It got there all the same. Marion closes her eyes for a moment on the stool, not quite sleeping, simply resting, the way you might rest in the last stretch of a long day when the hardest parts are finally behind you. The lamp burns low and steady beside her. The rain continues softly outside, gentle against the glass, patient, unbothered by anything. The cat sleeps on, her paws tucked beneath her, entirely unconcerned with the passing of the hour. And the room around them both simply holds, quiet and warm and complete, exactly the way a room is supposed to hold everything inside it once the day's work is finally, truly done. Somewhere beneath the stillness, the workshop's own particular hum continues, faint and steady, the old iron press breathing quietly in its rest, the stove murmuring low behind its door, the whole room settled into the same slow rhythm it settles into every single night at this hour. Dependable, unhurried, familiar. That hum will still be there tomorrow. It will still be there the night after that. It doesn't need watching over. It simply continues, the way this place always continues, whether anyone is awake to notice it or not. Tomorrow, the drawers will open again. The press will lower again. The inkstone will be wetted again, and the bundles will be tied again and carried out into the morning light to wherever they're needed. The bookbinder 2 streets over will collect his cream-heavy stock exactly as he always does, and never once think about the quiet hour it took to prepare it. The felts will come down off their rail, dry now, ready to be soaked and used again. The trough will be opened, and the pulp inside it, patient after its night of resting, will finally take its shape beneath tomorrow's hands. But that's tomorrow's work, and tomorrow can hold it perfectly well on its own, exactly the way it always has. Tonight, there is only this: the quiet room, the low lamp, the soft rain, the sleeping cat, and a stack of paper, finally flat, finally still, resting beneath the gentle weight of the press until morning finds it. If tonight felt like a good night for rest, subscribing to the SleepStory Collective means there will always be a new story like this one waiting for you. Whenever the pages start turning again and you need somewhere quiet to bring them to rest, you can always find your way back here. For now, let the workshop stay exactly as it is. Lamp low, rain steady, press silent, cat curled, ledger closed, every sheet finally settled. Let your own thoughts settle the same way, page by page, however many are left, without needing to finish any of them tonight. There's nothing more required of you. There's nowhere else you need to be. There's only this quiet room, and this soft rain, and this long, unhurried night, closing gently around you the way it closes around every tired thing that finally gets to rest. Good night.